Realme was only founded in 2018, and just 1 year later in 2019, they shocked the world by releasing one of the best flagship killers of all time, the Realme X2 Pro. In 2020, Realme released their follow-up, the X50 Pro, but some were a tad disappointed. It's now 2021 and Realme have just launched their latest take, the Realme GT, but does it have what it takes to be crowned the best flagship killer of the year? Well, so far so good, since the Realme GT is one of the cheapest smartphones in 2021 to house Qualcomm's flagship chipset, the Snapdragon 888. I have the blue version of the phone, at least that's what it translates to anyway. It's pretty much a black version of any phone with blue shimmers in it. It kind of looks like a bit of a carbon fiber mesh inside there as well. It looks fantastic. You can also pick it up in silver or that almighty racing stripe vegan leather. It's pretty much a goldish yellow with carbon fiber stripe on the left hand side down the camera module. We get a 4500 mAh battery, a 65 watt super dart fast wire charging. Unfortunately, no wireless charging, no IP certification, but we do have 5G as well as Wi-Fi 6. We get Gorilla Glass 5 in the front. I'm pretty sure this is a plastic frame, but we do have a glass back over here, and it is a hell of a fingerprint magnet. Though, luckily, we get included that silicone case in the box, which looks okay on the phone. It's a bit on the cheap side, though we do have a power button with a yellow accent. We have a split volume rock on the left-hand side, which is fantastic. And we have a dual SIM tray. Unfortunately, no space for a micro SD slot here. We have a USB Type-C with 2.0 transfer speeds at the bottom. And we have the return of the headphone jack, as well as dual stereo speakers, one of them being on the earpiece, and they're both paired with Dolby Atmos. That camera bump at the back is pretty small, I guess smaller than other Xiaomi devices out there, a little bit bigger than that from iQOO and Motorola. So on a table, on a flat surface, there's not too much camera wobble or surface wobble going on around the phone. When it comes to design, it does look a tad bit outdated compared to the rest of the 2021 flagship killers out there, but it is on the lighter side of things at 186 grams and quite thin at 8.4 millimeters, though not the thinnest I've seen. That back does look pretty striking, but what about the front? Well, we are welcome to a 20:9 aspect ratio, slightly small 6.43 inch Full HD Super AMOLED display with 16 million colors, 100% P3 color rating, 1000 nits of brightness, 120 Hz refresh rate, and 360 Hz touch sampling rate. Looks pretty decent up close and personal as well. And comparing the color accuracy as well as the detail to other smartphones in its price caliber, it looks pretty good. I must say it's really, really bright, and there's quite a lot of pixels per inch because it is a smaller screen compared to the others at the same resolution. But it's not the brightest phone out there, which it is currently competing against the likes of the Redmi devices on the left and the Vivo on the right hand side, but it's not quite as dim as the Motorola Edge S, rocking an IPS LCD screen. Luckily, we do have a high refresh rate here, that being 120 Hz. All the phones on the left, including the Realme GT, as opposed to the 90 Hz on the Motorola Edge S. That IPS LCD screen really does show on the Motorola. I'm really glad that Realme are sticking to AMOLED over here. 120 Hz is up from the 90 Hz that we saw in the X2 Pro and X50 Pro last year. We do have a couple other options to flick between when it comes to tweaking with the display. And of course, we do have dark mode, and much like ColorOS 11 from Oppo, since that is the parent company of Realme, we have 3 iterations of dark mode, being very dark, medium, and quite light. And it does a very good job at getting those rich black tones in all first-party apps. We also have the same crazy always-on display that we see in ColorOS from Oppo, with custom patterns that you can create yourself, and you do feel some sense of achievements once you get it looking right. Not quite like mine. Mine is a little bit of a disaster, but it's still fun to do nonetheless. I still prefer the standard one. That's why I don't tinker with it too much. And yes, we do have an in-display fingerprint sensor over here. It is indeed optical. The Redmi Note 10 Pro has a physical one on the side, as well as the Redmi K40 Pro, its biggest competitor. It's quicker than those, slightly quicker than the in-display one from iQOO, and of course a hell of a lot quicker than the Motorola Edge S's. We also have 2D Face Unlock over here. It's unsecure, unfortunately, but most phones in this price range are anyway, but it does a super job at being super snappy compared to all other phones around here, pretty much on par with the phone from iQOO. Once again, a lot faster than the one from Motorola. We do have a 16 megapixel f2.5 selfie snapper, no dual punch hole like we saw in last year's iteration, and the portrait mode comes out quite nice with barely any edge detection.
Yo, what's up guys, this is Technic recording a 1080p at 30 FPS selfie video on the brand new Realme GT. Unfortunately, it is completely capped at 1080p and 30 frames per second when recording using the selfie cam. Let me know what you guys think of the audio and video quality when using selfie video on the Realme GT. There's also dual video mode, and you have a couple different options of doing half and half the screen, or just a little block in the corner like this one, or even a circle. It looks pretty great. I think the quality looks pretty decent, and you can switch the different zoom options on the main camera as well, but you can't go to ultra wide.
At the back, we have a 64 megapixel Sony IMX682 sensor with an aperture of f1.8. This can be binned down to 16 megapixel. We also have an 8 megapixel ultra wide and a 2 megapixel macro sensor. Unfortunately, no telephoto this time around. The 8 megapixel ultra wide looks all right with AI included. 64 megapixel main looks decent. 16 megapixel binned looks even better. Those colors really do pop. 2 times digital zoom over here doesn't look too bad. 5 times digital zoom looks quite bad. 10 times is completely unusable, and that's the max zoom that you can get. We also have that macro cam, which does a pretty good job, but I feel like ultra wide cameras are doing a better job these days, which makes the macro cameras pretty useless. And portrait mode comes out pretty decent, even though there is a lack of a depth sensor. Here is 4K 60 FPS video. Unfortunately, no 8K video this time around. We do have gyro electronic image stabilization over here. And I'm not sure if you've noticed this, but even at 1080p 60 FPS, things look very zoomed in compared to what I usually do in my reviews. And that is because whenever you switch over to 60, for some reason it zooms in. It doesn't go from 1x to 2x on the user interface of the camera, but it does a natural zoom in, which really sucks. I'm pretty sure this is a bug within the software of the camera UI, but 4K 30 FPS is now zoomed out to regular 1x, 1080p 30. Once again, looks pretty good because it is not so darn zoomed in. It really sucks that 60 FPS has that issue at the moment, but I'm pretty sure it will be fixed. We also have 1080p 30 FPS using the main camera and AI, which looks great. It makes those colors pop. And we do have ultra wide, though it is capped at 1080p and 30 FPS. It's still quite nice and fluid. We also have some stabilization options over here. There is no ultra steady enabled at the moment. Here's ultra steady, and then we also have ultra steady max, not called the Pro as we see on Oppos. They try to have some amounts of differentiation. We do have Realme UI 2.0 skinned over Android 11. It is literally Oppo's ColorOS 11, 11.1, 11.2. We do have Google rooted into the phone, but it looks just like Oppo's ColorOS, which is really not a bad thing to say. The multitasking gestures are exactly the same. The floating windows and mini windows are the same. The transitions are great. We even have the little lift from corner to corner to bring the top icons down, which works great. And you can hold the icon to switch between pages with your other hand, which is awesome. We also have a smart sidebar, which we've seen on ColorOS as well, which works pretty well for those that are into that kind of thing. And we do have System Cloner as well, which I recently showcased on the Oppo Find X3 Pro, and it works just as good as that. Now we can also change the wallpaper using an existing wallpaper, but it's just a bunch of default presets using different colors. And we do have a certain amount of dynamic wallpapers, literally the same that you saw on Oppo's ColorOS. You can also change the icons like on Oppo software, as well as the fingerprints. And why is that? It's because Oppo is actually the parent company of Realme. That's why we have all of these personalization options, much like we see in ColorOS 11, 11.1, and 11.2. It's really not a bad thing. I absolutely love Oppo's software, and the haptics feel pretty light. They're pretty much on par with anything in this price range. The good thing is that we do have dual speakers with Dolby Atmos, so let's give it a listen and compare it to the others. We have GameSpace software over here in order to jump into the gaming to match with those incredible sounding speakers. And under the hood, of course, we have that wonderful Snapdragon 888 chipset. We can also pair that up with competition mode within the GameSpace settings before we launch our game. And going into it, there's a little smart tab on the left-hand corner so that you can bring in a bit of a screen overlay to see your FPS for a little second over there and do other certain things while gaming, or if you want to just block all things out. First game here is Genshin Impact, speeding it up over here just to show you guys how stable that frame rate is at the top corner. We do have the highest possible graphics settings all the way to the top, and max FPS here is sitting pretty much a solid 60 FPS, one slight dip over there, but things are looking good in terms of the Snapdragon 888 powered Realme GT for gaming. And this is a very graphics intense game for any who don't know that already. It's pretty much the benchmark for smartphones in order to test their gaming abilities. PUBG Mobile, unfortunately, we can't get the 90 FPS yet. I'm pretty sure the devs will work on it, though we can do HDR graphics at extreme. So it's not capping at 60 on the phone, but on the game itself. So I'm sure that will get fixed, but it's still nice and smooth and very stable at 60 FPS, and it looks great. Now, with their trigger 2, it actually says that we can choose ultra graphics and max FPS at 120 frames per second, since the game doesn't have an FPS cap, but we are getting capped at 60, meaning it's not the game, it's the phone. So the phone needs to work its kinks out, hopefully in a future software update, to be able to support games that can indeed get up to 120 FPS. Real Racing 3 is another example of this. It is capping at 60 FPS, not because of the game, but because of the phone. Hopefully this will get fixed by Realme pretty soon in UI version 2. Moving on to benchmarks, we're going to be jumping between AnTuTu and then going to Geekbench to test out CPU and 3D Mark to test out the graphics of the phone. And we're going to start off by checking the battery percentage at the start, as well as the battery degrees in Celsius, and we'll compare that in the end to see the milliamp hour per minute reading when it comes to battery drain, as well as the degrees in Celsius gained at the end, which we're pretty much getting to right now since I sped through all the benchmarks. So at the end of this 14-minute 3-tier benchmark test, we got a battery drain of 25.7 milliamp hours per minute, which is slightly higher than the average Snapdragon 888 smartphones on my channel. When it comes to temps, things got ridiculously hot, adding 24.8 degrees in Celsius, which is the hottest I've ever seen. We just got the highest AnTuTu score I have ever seen on my channel. 748,943 points, puts it well above all Snapdragon 888 smartphones here. When it comes to Geekbench, things don't look as good as AnTuTu, though it's still pretty high, third, but still above its competitor, the Redmi K40 Pro in single core, unfortunately not so much in multi-core. And once again, right at the top in terms of 3D Mark Wildlife in score and FPS, getting a whopping FPS of 34.9, the Realme GT is certainly a stunning device, but in all honesty looks a bit outdated in terms of design. The camera module is very similar looking to recent Realme phones, and while the 64 megapixel IMX682 sensor does a more than decent job, it's slightly let down by a subpar 8 megapixel ultra-wide lens and the lack of a telephoto camera which was present in its predecessors. What the Realme GT does right is include a snappy in-display fingerprint sensor, which its competitor the K40 Pro lacks. It also brings back the headphone jack, which was missing in its predecessor. Realme have also increased the refresh rate to 120Hz, which makes for smooth scrolling, and when paired with the beefy Snapdragon 888 chipset, plays games like an absolute champ. Let's just hope it gets 120 FPS support from game developers in the near future. The 6.43-inch Super AMOLED display is also a very manageable size and boasts 1000 nits of brightness. All that said, the Realme GT is not alone in the flagship killer race for 2021. The Redmi Note 10 Pro and Moto Edge S both cost less and edge forward in certain aspects, but they both lack a flagship chipset and super fast charging. The GT's closest competitor, the Redmi K40 Pro, is seriously tough to beat, but the Realme GT takes the lead in terms of faster charging, a headphone jack, and better software optimizations. The Vivo iQOO 7 boasts even faster charging than the Realme GT, but has a much smaller battery and costs a hell of a lot more money, not to mention it also lacks a headphone jack. That leaves us with the Realme GT, a great all-round phone that has a few minor drawbacks but still packs a punch for its budget-friendly price tag. It may very well be the best flagship killer of 2021 so far, but there's still plenty time for that to change.